Hi, I'm author and designer Rebecca Kemp Brent. I'm a big fan of history, and I like thinking about the period of time right around the turn of the 20th century. One of the pictures I carry in my head from that era is the beautiful little bag that a lady would carry out with her when she was going out for the evening, you know, when you only need a couple of essentials. So I have a little bag I'd like to show you today. So you can bring a little bit of that era to your house and your life too. All that we need to make the bag is 4 squares of fabric, 2 for the lining and 2 for the outside, a little cording, and this is the secret. This little ring, which is going to be used for the closure on our bag. All of these materials, by the way, are going to be available on the website, so you can go there and download the instructions and the materials. The first thing I'm going to do is start at the end and make the closure. So I have a short piece of cord or ribbon and my little ring, and I'm just going to make what's called a lark's head knot. You've probably been doing that your whole life and don't even know it. You put the bent, folded part of the center of your ribbon through the ring, and then just tuck the ends of the ribbon or cord back through, and just like that you have a little knot. Then we're going to take this piece of cord or ribbon. I'm just going to say ribbon since that's what I'm using, but you'll know that I mean either one. And I'm going to pin that to the right side of the top square for my bag, just so that it sits right in the very corner of that square. And then we have 2 other pieces of the ribbon, and I'm going to pin one end of a piece of ribbon to a corner, and without twisting it, I'm going to pin the other end of that ribbon to an adjacent corner of the square. So in this case, it goes right on top of the piece that has the ring in it. And you can see that I've already pinned here on the other side my second piece of ribbon. And just to make sure that the center of the ribbon doesn't get in the way, I'm just going to sort of make a little bundle out of it. And then I'm going to pin just to hold that in place. Take a square of your lining, and I have put interfacing on my lining fabric. And the reason for that is if you're using a heat sensitive or fancy or delicate fabric for the outside of the bag, sometimes the lining is a more practical place to put that fusible interfacing. It really doesn't matter whichever one you want to use for your project. And you can see that I've drawn lines, the center lines in both directions on my square. Then I just put these 2 squares with their right sides together, and I'm going to take it to my sewing machine and sew around all 4 edges with a 1/4 inch seam allowance. So I've set my machine up. As you stitch, just be sure that you take those pins out when you come to the corner, pivot at the corner. You want to be sure that you're catching the ends of the ribbons, but not any other part of the ribbon as you sew. And you don't need to leave an opening for turning this. Okay, and when I get all the way around my bag, I'm just going to overlap my stitching by about 1 inch and then cut my threads. So I have the whole thing stitched. Now I'm going to cut along the lines that I've drawn on my fabric. And you can start with a clip through all of the layers of fabric at the edge, but then you want to work your scissor in and cut through just 1 layer of fabric at a time. And the reason for that is that you want to be really sure that you're not cutting those ribbon ends. This is one of those techniques that I guarantee is easier when nobody is watching you. Okay, so I have the lining cut, and now you can see how it's easy to open this up, and you just use the cut lining then as your guide when you cut through the other layer of your fabric. And I'm going to continue with the cutting until I have 4 little pieces of fabric. Just finish this last one up. So I wind up with squares of fabric that are connected by a ribbon, and I'm going to have 2 sets of those. Then I want to trim the ends, the corners, but I want to be really careful that I'm only cutting through the fabric and not cutting through the ribbon or cord ends themselves. And the reason for that is leaving a little extra here is actually going to reinforce it and make it less likely that you will pull that out. Then you turn this right side out and give it a little bit of a press. So you're going to wind up with 4 squares, 2 sets that are completely finished. Now for my next little bit of stitching, I'm going to change the stitch on my machine to a multi-step zigzag stitch. And that's a zigzag that instead of just making a left and a right swing, it also comes down right in the middle. And again, make sure you don't have your ribbon twisted. And you're going to put the 2 pieces of fabric side by side, just like this, and move those under your presser foot. And I have the stitch length set for a really short stitch so that it makes a sort of a bar tack at the very end. Then I'm going to switch back to the regulation stitch length. In this case, it's 1 millimeter long. And I'm just going to stitch those edges together for about 1 inch. And then switch back to the short length again, just to make that little bit of a bar tack. And then tie off and cut my threads. And now you can see that I've actually attached these 2 squares to each other, but only for about 1 inch of the distance. And I'm going to continue with my other pair, and then when I have both pairs joined, I'm going to sew the 2 pairs together, but this time around you'll have the option of reaching in through the center so that you can make sure those ribbons are out of your way. And I'm going to set the machine now for an overcasting stitch that's 7 millimeters wide. That gives you a nice wide 1/4 inch bite. And I'm going to actually stitch all my squares together with this, overcasting as I go. You could also do this with a serger if you wanted to, but sometimes when I'm making a small project, it's just so quick and simple to use the overcasting stitch on my machine. I don't have to switch anything, don't have to go to a different machine. And I'm just going to sew around the entire outside edge again. Okay, 1 more corner. And once again, when I get back to the beginning of my stitching, I'm just going to overlap the stitching and then tie off the ends. So all that's left is for me to turn my bag right side out. Just reach in with your fingers and turn each one of those corners. I usually find that I don't need to trim the extra fabric at the corners this time, but you can always do that if your bag will look better with the trim. To make the closure work, I'm going to take my long pieces of ribbon and thread them through the ring, just like this. And I've added a tassel to the bottom of my bag because that helps the bag to hold its shape, and it also gives you another option for embellishing the bag. So I hope this is a project you can have a little fun with, and maybe when you carry it, you can think about the ladies from the turn of the century.